Hey everyone, and welcome to Travel Through Stories. My name is Sean, and today I want to talk about Magda Cârneci's new novel, FEM, translated from the Romanian by Cotter. This is the only novel by Cârneci, who is an established poet, essayist, art critic. I believe she has a PhD in art history. And it was only a few weeks ago that it was finally published in English. Cârneci is pretty famous and influential in her native Romania, so I was really excited to finally have the chance to read her stuff. And FEM really doesn't disappoint. This is a beautiful and honest, and at times very difficult work that explores feminism in the very sort of pure sense of the female experience from almost every angle. It's a very disjointed book, as it isn't really quite a novel, because it mixes forms and it mixes fiction and nonfiction quite a bit, but it's certainly not an essay. This disjointedness, though, actually helps Cârneci effectively illuminate the multivalent aspects of her primary object of study, the female experience. And while the subject matter is obviously really interesting, I do want to reiterate how beautiful this book really is. You can really tell that Cârneci is a poet. In many ways, this book works more like a prose poem than a novel. You know the saying in film studies, every frame a painting? In this book, almost every sentence is a poem. This gives the whole book such a depth that really makes it so I can't discuss it all here. Instead, I'll focus in on a few key moments and a few key scenes that I found particularly compelling. And I hope to kind of give you a taste of her prose style. I noted earlier that this book is really disjointed, and it really is, as it provides these vignettes that focus in on specific moments in this woman's life. But there is a guiding hand through all of this exploratory analysis of the female experience. We have our own Virgil, or Beatrice, and actually I don't really need to make my own literary references, as our narrator tells us in the opening lines of this book how we should understand her. She explains, "Darling, don't be scared. I have a secret. I'm a kind of Scheherazade, a little, everyday Scheherazade in an ordinary neighborhood, in a provincial city. Your personal Scheherazade, even if you won't cut off my head in the morning when I fail to keep you awake all night with extraordinary stories." And just a few lines later, she tempers this sentiment a little bit by explaining, "No, stay calm. I'm not here to preach. I'll be a tamer Scheherazade. I'll tell you stories about me, about us, about the small but odd things we pass over without noticing, amazing but normal stories, mysterious scenes we usually forget, which our memory sets aside out of stubbornness or fear." And for those who don't know, Scheherazade or Scheherazade is the female narrator of the 1001 Nights, usually called the Arabian Nights in the English-speaking world, though as far as I understand it, that's kind of an 18th century Orientalist title that a lot of people are pushing back on now. The frame narrative of 1001 Nights is that there's this woman named Scheherazade who just married a king who is really jealous and who is notorious for marrying virgins and then killing them in the next morning after they get married so they don't have a chance to cheat on him. What Scheherazade decides to do, because she doesn't want to be executed, is to keep him occupied every night by telling him these stories. And since she's such a great storyteller, the king becomes enthralled in the stories and wants to hear the ending, so he keeps pushing back her execution. And of course, when one story ends, Scheherazade just begins another, and the cycle goes on and on. And this is actually really important to understand when reading FEM, as this provides us right off the bat with some context as well as some intertextuality to help us understand this book. This book, like 1001 Nights, is consciously subverting the patriarchy, as Scheherazade and our narrator are both working within systems that are often violently patriarchal. And clearly there is some sort of meta-narrative going on here, as Cârneci is also working and publishing within a male-dominated space. So with this frame and the narrator speaking directly to us, she isn't really speaking directly to us, she's speaking to a lover, but the constant use of the second person pronoun makes it really feel like she's addressing you, the reader. We're pulled along to witness these vignettes of the female experience, everything from a young girl's first period to her first crush, to a woman's pregnancy and aging and simply existing as a woman. There's a really strong focus here on the female body, as one thing that Cârneci seems to be interested in is how women particularly need to struggle not only against the, vast hegemonic patriarchy built into Western cultures, but they also need to struggle constantly against their own bodies. Cârneci seems really interested in the creation of the feminine, and she explores the nature of women while also exploring how gender is performative and kind of creates itself in some way. There's a lot of French feminism going on here, some of which I don't fully understand because I'm not super well read in French feminism, but others I do see echoes of, most particularly the work of Simone de Beauvoir, who is in some of her work really interested in how the female is kind of created by society's gaze of her. Early in this novel, we see a woman sitting on a park bench by herself, and all of a sudden she becomes hyper-focused on her physical body. The text reads, "I sat there on the green bench in the city park, in the desolate and luminous morning, thinking about myself for the millionth time. Why wasn't it working? What was wrong with me? Where did I go wrong? I stared without blinking, almost hypnotized at the sycamore trunks, stained white and brown, damp with dew. Why was I not satisfied with myself? What was not right? The bench was old and rickety, the green paint was peeling, and underneath you could see a lighter color, whitish yellow, like an old leper. Then I stared for a long time, hungrily, at my young body, my hands, arms, chest. I passed quickly over my abdomen, slowly over my legs. I studied my pointed white shoes, as though I was seeing them for the first time. At that moment, a brown ant was hurrying over the tip of the left shoe. What is happening? Why aren't I right with myself? What have I forgotten? What don't I understand? Obsessively, the same thought passed through my mind as my unsettled gaze rose over the transparent nylon socks wrapping my thin calves, then the gently curved thighs under the white dress I had on. I drew my eyes slowly, more and more curious, over my womb, domed somewhat. Then I came to the bodice. I held my gaze on my breasts, as though I was surprised by their round crests beneath my dress. This passage really goes on, and it repeats itself a few times throughout this book. But this interest in the physical is wonderfully explored, as Cârneci also has these long and beautiful descriptions of the natural world. That is, the bodily and physical experience of the woman is demystified and brought to a material, physical end. And these two things, the female body and the natural world, are connected. And not only do they complement each other, but they are each other. Her body is the world, and the world is her body. I step into the world, into unctuous material, into warm perplexity. It is really my body. It is really the world. A kind of grenade with the pin removed, a burst pomegranate, overripe. Its core is pink and juicy, full of round, dark-colored seeds, glowing gently, waiting to explode. The core unfolds slowly, like the immense bud of an unknown flower. In my heart, blinded by sunlight. Slowly, world, do I enter you. You swallow me. I swallow you. You devour me. I devour you. The voluptuousness of disappearance. Slowly I take possession of you, digest you, metamorphose you. Drops of fecund sweat hang soft from the leaves. Pieces of burning quartz scintillate in the mountains high and deep. Frothing rivers crash onto elastic shores of flesh. I wait for you. This interest in the physical and material world is really explored quite a bit in this book. That being said, though, Cârneci fluctuates between this sort of realist, materialist feminism, which explores the physical and material experience, and how these things are both natural and cultivated by society, alongside this much larger metaphysical feminine experience. And these moments were some of my favorite moments in this whole book, as they expand outwards so much to include a kind of universal and mythic experience. When she's a young girl, she keeps sneaking out of her room to go outside and gaze at the stars. I looked at the stars. I sang softly, dangling my thin legs. I gazed ravenously at the black blue mountain sky filled with tiny pearls, crystals, and diamonds, as though the skin of a drum pierced by countless holes through which shining threads of milk flowed from the ocean of light beyond. My small brain struggled to understand what infinite meant, where the end of the universe was, what the earth was in the sea of stars, and what I was, a girl, a minuscule being, a kind of intelligent microbe, as I learned at school, a kind of unsteady red globule of blood inside of a cell, itself part of a wide tissue in a giant body on this giant planet. She's struggling with this idea of infinity, but she eventually connects this idea to her own self-perception of herself. We have this beautiful passage a bit later on which connects her relationship with this boy to this metaphysical myth. I understand somehow, with a different and unlimited understanding, that people in general, represented at this moment by the two of us in this silent forest, are small gods, but blind, forgetful, egotistical. I understand something valuable, but it is not clear, not limpid. We are actually small gods, but also children, infant gods, created by a greater force, planted here in a vast, receptive uterus, thrown into the loneliness of a planet of immense impersonal power in order to grow and to understand, to conclude our unconcluded being and to transform into something else. And all of these metaphysical ideas complement her exploration of the physical and material world that we looked at earlier. And we get this incredible passage later on, which explicitly connects these two things and explains how she is the world. But what if suddenly, in this giant world, there were only me alone on a barren beach, in a barren world, in the universe emptied of beings, things, and events, purified, liberated of all shapes, of all these tiresome sounds, of all this extenuated insanity. Yes, only this gentle, rose-colored darkness under the eyelids, this good, restful nothing, where there is only me. And suddenly, everything was me. The towel was me. The sand was me. The warm and trembling air was me. The far-off foam of the sea was me. The very blue sky, very high, the sky was me. The entire world was me, etc. But who is the world? The world is me, myself expanded, poured out, spread from my mind outward. My thoughts as big as the world, pure consciousness, vast, flowing in all directions, filling everything up without limits, without borders. But who is me? Me is the world. I am the world. The world is suddenly equal to my mind, a fistful of lucid and vivid consciousness, which coincides within my cranium, stupefying, exhilarating with the sky and sea, with the universe, with the infinite. I am the extremely blue sky. I extend my dome over the world. And it goes on, and it's just wonderful. This unity with the universe is, I think, Cârneci's goal. But the problem is that most women won't allow themselves this unity. In some ways, our subjectivity and our cultures hold us back and block this path. Our narrator explains how this is being done in the present. Darling, I know you prefer television and the internet. There you have all you want and don't want. Everything after evening, you gulp down a cocktail of films, talk shows, and news programs, computer games and links, sites, and blogs of every color. It's your cheap drug. It's democratic and beloved. It kills your time and dazzles your brain's circumvulsions. But you're allowing yourself to be blinded by images from outside your being, from the global collective mind. You stop paying attention to your inner film. It spills out of you like a hidden river, and it waits for you, while you let yourself drown in a sea of straying images, and whatever they are, banal or aggressive, dirty or criminal, and so you deplete your visionary power. Her subjectivity becomes objectivity as she reckons with this female experience, and this is one of the key ideas explored throughout this book, the idea of nature versus nurture. Is gendered experience natural, or is it created by society? This is a fundamental issue of feminist thought and in gender studies, of course. And again, this is something that Simone de Beauvoir thinks about a lot in French, especially with the connections between gender and language in French. And I also want to note Judith Butler here, as they are also keenly interested in the performance of gender and gender performativity, and kind of arguing that gender is entirely a social construct. Cârneci is exploring these different feminist theories in this book, and she's clearly exploring way more than just the few that I mentioned. I think someone with a more full comprehension of the history of feminism, especially European feminism, as she seems to be drawing much more from French feminists than she is from North American feminists. A person with that kind of background and knowledge would be able to extrapolate a lot more on these ideas, as Cârneci is clearly very learned and is both subtly and overtly exploring these theories in this book. But going back to this conversation about nurture versus nature in gender studies and the idea of gender performativity, Cârneci does come to some sort of conclusion to this debate, which sort of agrees and disagrees with both sides of this argument. I should note that this next passage does come from later in the book, so it might be a small spoiler, though I don't think you can really spoil a book like this. But she imagines this conversation as a game of chess and explains, "Darling, they say that men and women are improvising actors, pushed onto the stage for an hour under the powerful lights. In fact, as I have said, they are in a complicated game of chess on the great board of the world, with different colored squares under different lights. I know, darling, that others have discovered the same thing, but I've only recently learned this amazing fact. We are living chess pieces, and, at the same time, we are the chess players." This book explores so many ideas about gender, sexuality, and feminism that I don't really have time nor the proper educational or subjective personal background to really touch on. Again, I think someone with a much better understanding of the history of feminism, especially in Europe, and with a better understanding of psychoanalysis and its connections to gender studies, would probably be a bit better suited to analyzing this book. Indeed, there are all these dreams that our main character has, and someone with a much better understanding of Freud and Lacan and other psychoanalysts could probably do a lot of really interesting thinking with. Overall, however, I think this book is a masterful exploration of everything feminism. It has everything you want in a good book, an erudite and nuanced analysis of really important issues, mixed with a poetic beauty that I hope some of the longer passages that I read effectively showed. And all of this is mixed with the fact that this book is really important right now, as political discourse on gender, I like to think anyways, is at the forefront of our cultural consciousness. Cârneci is a really important and really forceful voice on this matter in Romania, and I'm just grateful that it was translated so I could experience it as well. Let me know what you think about FEM if you've read it. This book just came out a couple of weeks ago, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how it's received by the English-speaking world. But for now, thanks for watching.